Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Speaker.
Alfred Naro.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to take a call on the third reading of the Social Assistance Living Alone Payments Amendment Bill. First of all, Mr. Speaker, can I start by wishing you a happy Easter, and also to all of our colleagues and parliamentarians in the House, and also to the rest of New Zealand that is there. Mr. Speaker, Easter is a time where, yes, it's a time of rest and relaxation, but it's often a time of reflection. And Mr. Speaker, it's at these times that those who are vulnerable in our communities, our elderly, those who have served, who have saved and who have given their life to civil society, to contributing, Mr. Speaker, are well deserved. And at these times, Mr. Speaker, when they do reflect, I think the question is, that will be asked, how has this bill made a difference in their lives, and can it make a difference? And Mr. Speaker, we'd like to say that it does. And in the words of the previous Speaker, to this bill, let's do it right. Well, Mr. Speaker, we are. There may be minor changes in this bill, Mr. Speaker, but they are major in regards to the impact and the effect of the very people in whom we're wanting to serve. And as the previous Speaker said, let's take care of those who've cared for us. Over many years, Mr. Speaker, they've paid their taxes, they've contributed in voluntary ways to our society, to our communities, to our families and to our homes. And Mr. Speaker, that's what this bill does. Mr. Speaker, it does two very simple things. And addresses two issues. The bill addresses the issues in regards to the current living alone payments to ensure that superannuants and veterans pensioners living alone do not have to make separate application. I know that's been repeated over and over again. In other words, Mr. Speaker, in plain English, it just simply brings the two into one. It makes it easier, and so therefore they're not having to go and to reapply. In fact, in many occasions, Mr. Speaker, many do not know to apply for the living loan payment and within the given time period of within 28 days. So in fact, Mr. Speaker, they don't often claim that, they don't often access this. What this simply will do, Mr. Speaker, it will give an easier sense of access to allow them, Mr. Speaker, to access the support that they need in this regard. Mr. Speaker, I think this is a caring bill. I think this is a bill that actually shows the rest of New Zealand, especially those that are in a time of reflection over Easter, will simply say that we may not understand all the complexities of this bill, but what we do understand, Mr. Speaker, in a very small way, it's made things easier, more accessible, so the support to the vulnerable that need it, and in this case, our elderly, Mr. Speaker, our superannuants, our veterans, our war pensioners, will receive the support that they absolutely need. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to commend this bill to the House.
Andrew Little.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to take a call on the Social Assistance Living Alone Payment Amendment Bill. And so, like previous Speaker Alfred Naro, I appreciate that we are debating this very important piece of legislation, very important to those who stand to benefit from it. And as Mr. Naro himself acknowledged, they are the people who have, in large part, made a significant contribution, whether as people who are retired, they're superannuitants, or as veterans also have made a significant contribution. And we are debating this measure on the cusp of the break for Easter, itself a significant period, a significant time, a time for reflection, a time to reflect on the resurrection, and that is, of course, an important occasion. So we understand the magnitude of the time, but also of the issue. And so we might, in a spirit of reflection and when we might otherwise pat ourselves on the back, let's also reflect that the issue that underpins this legislation was first brought to the attention of the government in 2009, and it came back to the House for consideration by way of legislation in 2011. And much as we may, in our hearts, each of us here in the House today, value and cherish the contribution of those who will benefit from this legislation, we might also be honest and ask ourselves why it has taken 4 years to act on a problem that we knew in 2009, and indeed 2 years to come back and deal with the report back from the committee. But notwithstanding that, this is not a time to be churlish and combative. We've had that earlier in the week, but let's not brush under the carpet the fact that there has been some delay in bringing a resolution to this issue back to this House for passing. So, sir, as the other members who have already spoken have indicated, this does do a very important thing. for superannuitants, and there are many of them who find themselves living on their own because of the bereavement of their partner, their significant other, their spouse. They are faced with many things at that time, sorting out the affairs of the estate of their spouse, dealing with family members, dealing with issues, in many cases, that they're not used to having to deal with. And the last thing they want to be doing is having to trot off to the local WINS office and fill out more forms that entitle them to a higher payment. So this is a good measure, this bill, in that respect. This is a good measure, and it saves superannuitants who are in that position, who might otherwise feel a sense of indignity of having to put their hand out to the state that has already offered to support them, to put their hand out for a little more. Now that change will be automatic. And frankly, in this day and age of information and data storage and data gathering, notwithstanding the issues that has clearly caused in the last couple of years, in this day and age, that ought to be a reasonably easy process. So it is good that this legislation will enable that to happen. It'll be good for those who are in receipt of superannuation or a veteran's payment to not have to go through the process of applying for a payment that they are, under our social security scheme, properly and fully entitled to. In relation to that part of the bill that deals with dependent children, and particularly as it applies to superannuitants, there are some issues about that. And I think the plea from this side of the House is that flexibility is shown, and that we know that for young people who are still dependent after the age of 18, and they will be students, those who are still undergoing training, perhaps into their early 20s, is that it's possible that the bill as it presently is doesn't afford sufficient flexibility. We know that young people who have, and I was one of them, who had as parents superannuitants when I was at university, but in the first couple of years I was at university, I would go home for the Christmas break for work. This present arrangement, worked on the Think Big projects, understand about the satisfactory use of our gas resources. Wasn't quite sure of the economics of the Think Big projects at the time, but they have been transformed. They have been transformed. At least the synthetic fuel plant, we're no longer producing synthetic gasoline at great net cost to the nation, but with great returns to Mobil, who provided the technology and had a win-win agreement with the government. We now produce methanol, which provides returns both to the owner and to the community. But putting that aside, I was one of those people who would routinely return to a home, my parents' home. They were both superannuitants. But for somebody, a student returning to a superannuitant living on their own, this causes some inflexibility if they're sort of moving in and out of different categories and a different status for qualification for payment. And actually the economics of the household don't change a great deal if a student returns home for 10 or 15 weeks over the Christmas break. The economics of that household don't change for the superannuitant who runs it and owns it. So there does need to be some flexibility in that, which is the purport of the supplementary order papers in the name of Jacinda Ardern. And so, sir, addressing those two situations, the situation of the superannuitant who, generally through bereavement, very rarely through decisions of their spouse, finds themselves that they are living alone and therefore entitled to a higher payment, this legislation will make it easier. For the changes in relation to the definition of dependent child, of course we understand the need to do that in light of the decisions taken by the Social Security Appeal Authority, but the solution that we put up needs to recognise the most common situations that will be faced, and without compromising entitlement to their living alone payment for superannuitants and veterans who will otherwise be entitled to it under this provision. So, sir, with that, we have no qualms in supporting the legislation. It at this time, and understanding that it is going to be a constant process of ensuring that our social security system maintains its currency, that it meets contemporary needs. Ours is the party of social security. Ours was the party that was the architect of social security.
Tell us more.
And so, well, I'm happy to give you the history of it. Now, let me go back to the 1935 election, when people gathered in the streets on election night in 1935 with a sense of hope and a sense of determination, because they knew that life would change. And there were people there, pensioners, those who had suffered great hardship, who knew that a newly elected Labor government was going to do something for them. And they have done it. And it did happen, sir. Something new did evolve. In 1938, the Social Security Act was passed, and it has been a mainstay of New Zealand, the New Zealand economy and New Zealand society ever since. And that is why it is important that every time this House comes to consider social security legislation, that we get on board, we modernise it, we keep it contemporary, but at the heart of it, it is looking after our most vulnerable and looking after good, hard-working New Zealanders in their time of need. This legislation does that yet again, and for that reason, we in the Labor Party are proud to support it.
Mike Sabin.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Pleased to take a short call on this particular bill. Sir, we've heard some consternation from the other side in particular about the fact that this bill has languished on the order paper since 2009, but that seems to run in conflict with the need for some members to take exceedingly long calls and find ways to sort of run on loop their speeches, sir. The cynic in me says that possibly it's because they'd like to stall and delay the path of legislation, but I wouldn't like to take a cynical view, sir. The reality is that much of the delay in terms of this matter coming to the House, GFC, Canterbury earthquakes, and a massive legislative program that is about keeping the focus on managing the government's finances, sir, on ensuring that we're building a more competitive